How's it going, folks? This is Mike back for another episode of Movies from A to Z. And I guess this comes down to the heading of better late than never because it's almost 11 o'clock at night. And James and Ian put theirs up hours ago. So I'm trailing behind today. Sorry about that, guys. The film that I have for you today is a really good one. D stands for Dementia. And no, I'm not talking about me. I'm talking about this movie, Dementia. This is a film that was made in 1953. And it was not released until 1955 because it had a lot of censorship problems. Then it was released again in 1957 in a slightly altered version under the title Daughter of Horror. So D also stands for Daughter of Horror, okay? All right, so what is this film about? Well, I don't know where to start, so the best place to start is probably what Kino, in their beautifully remastered version of this film, which also includes Daughter of Horror, by the way. So you get two movies for the price of one. Here's what they say about it on the back. One of the strangest movies ever made. An entirely unique and utterly bizarre rediscovery, John J. Parker's Dementia is a 1950s-style foray into the mind of psychosexual madness, set entirely in a nocturnal twilight zone that blends dream imagery with the cinematic stylings of film noir. Dementia follows the tormented existence of a young woman haunted by the horrors of her youth, which transformed her into a stiletto-wielding, man-hating beatnik. Okay, what do you think of that? So, I hope that helps. It probably doesn't, but okay, so first of all, this movie is very short. It's only 57 minutes long, and the Daughter of Horror version is actually 2 minutes shorter because they cut a few things out. So, and it is also essentially a silent film. It has a soundtrack. It has music playing all the way through it. It has some sound effects. You get to hear people screaming. You hear laughter, things like that. But there is no dialogue, and there are no dialogue cards on the screen as there are in most silent films, because pretty much nobody is speaking. The main characters in the film convey their actions between each other, their exchanges, through eye contact, facial expressions, and gestures and bodily movements. The only time you might see somebody speaking is some peripheral character in the background in a party scene, something like that. You might see their lips moving in conversation. But it is a silent film. So if you happen to like silent movies, well, here's one made in 1953, and it's definitely worth checking out. It's very unusual, about as avant-garde as it gets. I would call this a very well executed experiment, and may not be to everybody's taste. And I don't think it's just a perfect film. It's not necessarily a horror film, although there's certainly some horrific elements in it. But yeah, the whole package is so fascinating and so unusual that it is absolutely worth checking out. So the central character in the film is this young woman on the cover here, played by an actress, I put that in quotes, actress named Adrienne Barrett, who, as far as I could find out on the Internet Movie Database, she only made this film. She has another credit of being in a film in 1987. I seriously doubt if that's the same person. IMDb has been known to make mistakes. The lead actor in the film is a man named Bruno Vasoda, who was somebody that, if you like cult films or you're interested in finding out about cult films of the 50s and 60s, that's the name you definitely should know, both as an actor and as a director, and I'll talk about him more in a minute. But so this woman has no name. She's simply called the Gamin, which of course relates to the French word gamine, which is a young woman who's kind of an orphan, or what is, how do you, sort of a lost soul, a girl who is kind of a street urchin and known to sort of be a trickster. Okay, I guess that's probably a very bad definition of the word gamine or gammon, but that's all she's called in the film anyway. And everybody else is just the man, the policeman, things like that. And at the beginning of the film, we see this matte painting of a street scene in a big city. It's looking at tall buildings and the street below, and in the center of the screen there is a vertical hotel sign, a neon sign, and the hotel is right on the left side. And the camera starts moving in toward a window at the hotel. And as it gets into the window, then it becomes live action. And what we see is this very drab hotel room, a young woman, Adrienne Barrett, lying on a bed asleep, and you can tell that she's very agitated. She's having a bad dream. So we enter her dream. This young woman is walking on a beach toward the shoreline, the waves, and she becomes afraid when she gets to the crashing waves, and she turns and runs the other way. The waves overtake her and cover her up, and that's when she wakes up from her dream, her nightmare. So she gets up and just sort of stands in the middle of the room for a few minutes, and then she goes to her dresser, looks in the mirror for a few minutes, and just looks at her face. Then she opens up the top drawer of the dresser, pulls out a switchblade, and then flicks the blade out, and just gives the blade a very kind of an arrogant look. Then she puts on her coat and she goes out for the night. And she has this odyssey in the night where she meets all kinds of strange people, gets involved in some bizarre activities. And I'm not going to tell you a single thing more because it's only 57 minutes long and I don't want to give too much away. I want you to try to consider seeing this. So it's hard to describe what happens. She just walks up and down dark city streets and gets involved in some very dramatic situations. And nothing is ever completely explained. And so is this woman living in a nightmare? Is she having a psychotic breakdown? What is really going on? Nothing is actually explained. You have to draw your own conclusions. So the film is essentially silent, but it has a musical soundtrack, very avant-garde type music, very kind of discordant melody by a composer named George Antil, who I guess was well known for that kind of music at the time. It also has a woman's operatic voice, which sings along with the melody. No lyrics, but she just, all that stuff. This woman singing is none other than Marni Nixon, who became famous later on in the 1960s for singing for other actresses in musicals, such as Audrey Hepburn in My Fair Lady, Natalie Wood in, West Side Story, also Deborah Kerr in The King and I. So this might be one of the first things that Marni Nixon ever did in films. I'm not really sure. Now, Bruno Vasoda, who is the lead actor, that's a name you should probably know because he was a very prominent guy in low-budget and cult films back in the 1950s and 60s. He directed 3 films. He directed Female Jungle in 1956, which had Jane Mansfield in it. He directed The Brain Eaters in 1958, which featured Leonard Nimoy, science fiction movie. Then he directed Invasion of the Star Creatures in 1962, which I have not seen. As an actor, he was in a whole bunch of films and TV shows. He was Yvette Vickers' husband in Attack of the Giant Leeches in 1959. He was in The Choppers with Arch Hall Jr., The Wasp Woman, directed by Roger Corman, A Bucket of Blood, and The Haunted Palace, also directed by Corman. So the guy was around for a long time and doing all kinds of cool things. Unfortunately, he died very young. He was only 54. He died in 1976. But that's a name that is definitely worth knowing about. And so what else to say about this? Here's what some other people had to say about the film. Actually, it's right on the cover. Variety at the time said, maybe the strangest film ever offered for theatrical release. The New York Censor Board said, overflows with horror, hopelessness, sadism, violent acts of terror, and outbursts of panic. And Downbeat magazine, which was a jazz magazine, said it was the first foreign film ever made in Hollywood. Now that's kind of a cool description. I like that. And then Preston Sturges, the legendary director, said, a work of art. It stirred my blood and purged my libido. Okay, well, we all need to purge our libidos from time to time. Now, what they changed for the re-release version, Daughter of Horror, they added a narrator. They found some guy named Ed McMahon, who at that time was a up-and-coming radio announcer in Philadelphia. And he did this movie. He added this real spooky dialogue that talked about this young woman and described her as being the daughter of horror. And it's it's not all through the film. It's just kind of in the beginning and a couple of times in the center, and then at the end to kind of sum everything up. And it actually works. It doesn't spoil the film at all. It actually adds something kind of cool to it. So no complaints. Very good movie. If I had any complaint about this film at all, it would have to be the voice of Marnie Nixon. I think I could have done with a little less Marnie Nixon because it became just pervasive, and I thought that, well, we could probably scratch this voice out of the soundtrack, maybe just here and there, but even that doesn't take away from the fascination of watching Dementia. I actually highly recommend this. I don't know what else I want to say here. Probably something intelligent, but I can't remember what it was. So if you haven't seen this, please look for it, okay? And James, this is a Mike film, definitely, absolutely. So thank you for watching, and let me know if you know about dementia or if you have dementia. Maybe you do.